I am joined by Robert Griffin III, James White, Field Yates Meanakeims. All right, so first play we're going to look at, 2nd and 2, one of the Patriots' first offensive plays. What's going on, everyone? Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Game Time. And thank you very much, Amit, for that very cool new intro for the show. I don't know if that's doubling back to you or not. I'm sorry if – did you hear that double back, or was it just me?
Just you, I think.
Okay. Well, I'll suffer through it. That's okay. But we're back with another Monday mailbag for you all. And I am joined by a member of the CLNS Media family. He is the host of the Nick Cattle Show, the Greg Bedard Football Podcast, as well as someone who appears regularly on 98.5 Nick Cattle. So excited to finally have you on, man. We've been trying to do this for a minute. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. It's a lot of pressure when you roll out that fancy open with RG3, Meanakeims, James White, and then you're like, let's go to Nick Cattle's. Here we go. But I'm glad to be on the show with you, man. I'm happy to chop it up with you a little bit about the Patriots today.
Likewise, brother. I got to say, man, one thing about living in New England, when I was in LA, I was like pretty consistently like one shade. Now with the freaking weather over here, I can literally see what season it was based on how pale I look in the intro. I'm going to have to get used to it. But enough with me. Let's get into the mailbag. You all threw us a lot of really good questions. Actually, before we get started, I want to throw you a bit of a softball. Training camp obviously coming up on Wednesday. What part of training camp are you most looking forward to? Obviously, a whole lot of storylines with new look offense. A lot of spots still up for grabs on defense. What are you most looking forward to seeing answered when we get things started?
Yeah, I mean, I think I could go with the low-hanging fruit and say Gerard Mayo, his first time as a head coach. How's he going to run training camp? What's that look like? We know that the start is going to be later than Bill Belichick's start was back in the day, so that's already a difference. So, how's Mayo look out there? What is he doing? But, of course, the quarterback competition between Brissett and May, and will it be a legitimate quarterback competition? And I'm also looking at, some other smaller things when you look at Alex Austin, right? I mean, the idea of Alex Austin or Isaiah Bolden or, Marco Wilson, one of those guys possibly stealing the cornerback 2 spot, and the offensive line. I mean, the offensive line, we've talked about it. You've talked about it. I've talked about it. We're all talking about it. Who's playing where? How's it look? Can it come together? So there's just a bunch of stuff, like you said, to keep an eye on during this camp.
Yeah, personally, I'm going to be looking forward to seeing if any of these young receivers can actually establish themselves and start to leapfrog the veterans. Obviously, in the spring, it's just a time where you really want to make sure things are running smoothly for the veterans. So that's usually why you see the older heads at the top. But we saw Jalen Polk making plays. Javon Baker missed time, but it looks like he was actually practicing today. Andrew Callahan reported he was out with a thumb injury. He's back out there. Even Kayshon Boutte making some plays in the last day of minicamp. And I really think this Patriots offense is probably going to go as far as a lot of its young players take them. If it's just KJ Osborne out there, Pop is in for probably a bigger season. But if you really rely on even Kendrick Bourne coming off the torn ACL, I feel like you can kind of see where the limit's going to be for this offense. They'll be steady, but it's going to be tough to compete against the really good defenses. But if you can get Javon Baker winning one-on-one, Jalen Polk making great run blocks, and then making his fair share of plays downfield, I think they start to possibly exceed expectations. But we'll see once, obviously, the Pats come on and things get really competitive. Another thing I want to touch on before we get into the mailbag, the contract situations of Matthew Judon and Devon Godshaw. Still up in the air. Mike Reese reported that the Patriots are still in talks with Matt Judon, which is a positive sign. But nothing has happened yet, and they like to get these things done before camp. What do you think of those situations, and do you think it's critical for the Patriots to retain either or one of their veteran defenders?
More critical to keep Judon in town, I think. You look at defensive edge, it's a question mark, right? Get into the quarterback. Joshua Uche, sub-pass rusher, wasn't as good last year as he was in 2022. Anthony Jennings, not really big impact when it comes to making plays on the quarterback. He's great at containing the edge, and he did a really good job on early downs last year after the Judon injury. And, Keon White, is Keon White going to pop? So I feel like there's a lot of questions at edge. How much will Wise play? So will Tavai get some snaps there as well? So many questions there. I think Judon is the priority number one. Godshaw, look, the Patriots' run defense was excellent last year. And if you can make an offense one-dimensional, it makes your defense much better, right? And Godshaw was a part of that. But I don't think they're going to have as much urgency with Godshaw. And frankly, when you look at the negotiations, they're having conversations with Matthew Judon. haven't heard an awful lot about conversations with Godchow. Doesn't mean they're not having them, but I do find it interesting that Mike Reese and others have said, the two sides have been talking. Reese and the Judon and the Patriots have been talking pretty consistently. So they haven't got a deal done yet, but it does make you feel like they're closer on a deal than Godchow. And on top of that, I would also say, I haven't really heard any rumors about a Judon trade. I know I talked about this idea of Judon in a second-round pick for Ayuk last week on 98.5. I know that's kind of been floated around since by, Chad Graff, and I know somebody tweeted at Judon with the idea, and I think he retweeted it or something.
Yeah, I retweeted it, yeah. He's just adding a lot of stoke to this fire, man.
I think he just loves it. He loves being part of it, right? But, there's really no tangible rumor out there about Judon getting traded. So you got to feel like he's going to be here, and whether or not those guys are happy being here, as long as they play, as long as they don't hold in and they're productive, I don't think the Patriots care much.
Yeah, with Judon on the business side, I would understand if they did, in some way have to trade him, if they couldn't find some kind of middle ground. But the fact they're working on it kind of says to me that at least what he brings in terms of being a playmaker, being a vocal leader, and even with the biceps and the age, they still do find value in him. And especially with the edge position being as kind of uncertain as it is, it makes sense to keep Judon even with all those other factors. But with Godchow, I'm right there with you. He doesn't have a whole lot of leverage in this situation. He's on the older side for a nose tackle, plays a position that it seems like is kind of getting phased out with the Patriots defense, as we saw when they moved on from Lawrence Guy. Now all the defenders have pass rush and run defense upside. Really, like you mentioned, Godchaw's only giving you the run defense and not even really stops or tackles for loss, the things that show up on the stat sheet. Obviously, you have your Vince Wilfork types where they eat space, and that doesn't always translate to the stat sheet. But someone like Vince Wilfork, you're still making plays in the backfield. There's a little bit of both. I understand why the Patriots aren't really jumping through hoops to try to find something to get done with Devon Godchow. All right, we got those two out of the way. Let's start getting into some mailbag questions, starting with Old Man Mob. Contributed a lot of really great questions to this one. Thank you, buddy. Who could be the most important player on the Patriots offensive line? For him, it's Sidy Sow. What are you thinking, Nick?
It all starts with Chooks for me. I mean, if Chooks Okorafor can be solid, he doesn't have to be great, right? You don't have to have a great offensive line. You and I know that offensive line play across the NFL isn't really that good anymore. It continues to deteriorate throughout the years. If you get a solid left tackle, you feel good about it. So if Chooks can hold his water on the left side, then you get the rest of the offensive line that kind of, I think, falls into place. You could look at Sow, who played left tackle at Eastern Michigan. He's back. Left guard at Eastern Michigan. He's back at that spot. So that's kind of home for him. David Andrews is David Andrews. Owenu, we got questions about that, but I would imagine if he stays at guard, you're fine there. And now you look at Caden Wallace on the right side. All you need, if you have 4 out of the 5 that are solid, you're in good shape. And so I start with Chooks on the left tackle spot, because if he doesn't work out, it's a domino effect.
I would probably go with Okorafor as well, just because if you can have a guy on the blind side you don't have to worry about, it doesn't have to be an all-pro like we've seen. You can have solid tackle play, and with a guy like Drake May or even Brissett, who have pocket presence, who can kind of make plays on their own, you can still get by. But I'll go with just a different answer, so we're just not repeating each other, because you made a very good point. I would kind of lean towards Sow, but that left guard spot kind of as a function of how defensive fronts work, where the strong side, usually the right side, that's where they'll put the 3 technique, where that guy's on an island. The right guards are kind of one-on-one more often, and if Mike Onwenu sticks there, you're probably not going to see him get much help. So Sidy Sow is naturally going to get more help. Now, smart defensive coordinators, they get those one-on-one matchups, and he does have to hold up on an island, but I think if Chooks works out, then Sidy Sow is just in a position that doesn't have quite as much value. So I'll go with Caden Wallace, because first of all, he is a rookie player. If he's someone that you don't have to worry about, again, right tackle, still a premium position, just because these great pass rushers are coming from either side, but he has experience. And we've seen how we've heard about Scott Peters and how he's really hands-on with these guys. He has playing experience. He worked under Bill Callahan, a legendary coach in his own right. He should have a good enough situation around him and next to Onwenu where he can have some margin for error, but still be able to play the position where he's more familiar. He doesn't have to start on the left side where you're acclimating to the NFL and You're having to find a whole different side of the line of scrimmage to kind of get used to. All right, let's see what next. What do we got up next? All right, Another old man mob. This one just kind of flowed. In your opinion, is there any chance that the Pats could trade for Amari Cooper? And if so, what would it cost in a trade and in a new contract? Personally, I'm not really good with the wide receiver contracts, but I will say, because of the age and where these Patriots receivers are in terms of wanting to draft and develop, I just couldn't rationalize, as much as I would like to, a way that they end up getting Amari Cooper, who's up there in age and probably wants the kind of contract that he can have for the rest of his career, something like 2 or 3 years.
I actually love the idea of Amari Cooper.
Sell me.
As long as it's a short-term deal, right? If you tack on an extra year or two, I think he's about 30 years old. He's not as old as some people think he is. So I think he still has a couple of years left in the tank. He was really productive last year for Cleveland, played well. He obviously fits the scheme with AVP coming from Cleveland. He's a great fit. You can move him around. He can play inside. He can play outside. And I don't think it's going to cost a ton to bring him in, because Cleveland, I don't think they want to give him a contract extension. The last that I read, and it was a few weeks ago, but the last I read was that, Cleveland wasn't budging off of a 1-year tack-on deal. So they only want to give him, 2025. If you're willing to give him through 26 and you play the next 3 years, I think you get a pretty good ROI with him. He's a true number one receiver versus what you have right now in that room. And I think he's a professional, right? He's a veteran. He obviously has a little bit of a connection there with Jacoby Brissett. So I think that it would be a really solid move as long as you weren't giving up a lot. And I don't think you have to. I think Cleveland traded like a 4th and a 5th to Dallas for him. I can't see him costing you more than, say, a 4th round pick or a 5th round pick. If I could get Amari Cooper for a 5th, I'm doing it. Absolutely. I'm bringing him in and I'm helping that wide receiver room.
I think the mentorship is a really big part of that as well. And having someone like, when you have a Kendrick Bourne, that's one thing. He brings great energy. He's going to try to keep you on the straight and narrow. But Amari Cooper can also just give you a whole different perspective, where he's been an All-Pro, he's been a Pro Bowler, he's been among the best in the league. And there's so many tricks of the trade that you can learn from him. It's just that if the Patriots are going to really go all out and give someone a big contract, I think you're going to have to pay Amari Cooper, probably not anywhere near like A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't think he's going to want anything like that. But I still think it'll be a big enough contract that you'd rather save that money. And if someone becomes available, if something happens with Ayuk and he actually becomes available, or if any of these guys like CeeDee Lamb ends up hitting the market next offseason, you have the money to say, all right, if we're going to spend, we have a superstar. A guy who competes top 5 every single year. And then if we have to rotate with our young guys, we will. But this guy is really going to lead the way. But, I could see arguments kind of going either way.
I think, look, if we're talking about, 20 plus million a year, 25 million a year, then I'm out on that. Right. I don't know what he would cost you. I'm guessing somewhere around, 18 million per is kind of my range for a guy that's now hit 30 years old. But if he's looking for bigger money than that, then I agree with you. I'd be uncomfortable with it. But if you can get him on a reasonable number for a reasonable price, I think he makes a lot of sense.
I definitely do like under 20. I was thinking something more like the mid-20s, but if you could do it for 18, you could potentially sway me. All right, we got many more questions coming up, but first, quick word from my friends at Game Time. Be right back.
It's the dog days of summer here in Boston, which means it's time to get to some games over at Fenway Park. This baseball season, I'm using Game Time to land my Red Sox tickets. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which means getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. It's super easy. You just open the app, click Sports, and the games will be right there for you. Right now, you can get tickets to the Rollin' Red Sox for as low as $11. You can even buy parking for the game and check out your seat view right in the app. With Game Time, you can save up to 60% by buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy shows, theaters, and more. Get the lowest price guaranteed, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, next question. Would it behoove the Patriots to sign a veteran left tackle now and have a camp battle, or wait to see if Okorafor has it? Honestly, I like what they've gotten Okorafor and Calvin Anderson on the left side. Maybe it's just me, but I'm kind of okay with seeing what that combo gives you. What do you think?
I'm starting to feel a little bit better about Okorafor after talking with Bedard. Bedard's a big offensive line guy. He watched some film, felt like that Okorafor has enough to work with. And, from what we've read, Taylor, we find out that the Patriots so far, early in camp, obviously, in minicamp, but they quote-unquote love what they've seen from Okorafor. So I think you give Okorafor a shot. You see how Calvin Anderson is physically after what he went through, which was just crazy last year. See how he feels, see how he looks. I don't think there's a rush to go out there right now. I mean, you look at Charles Leno, you look at Humphreys, you look at Bakhtiari. There are some options out there, but no teams are rushing to sign any of those guys. And I think, all 32 teams right now are in a position to say, let's see what we have. If we feel like there's an urgency up front, then we can make that change. We can pivot. But for now, see if Okorafor works. Because if Okorafor works, the dude's 26, 27 years old on a one-year deal, and it gives you the inside track. I mean, perfect world, Taylor, perfect world is if Okorafor works out for you, you got the inside track on an extension, and now you don't have to worry about left tackle for the next 3 or 4 years, which would be absolutely splendid for Patriots fans to not worry about that spot. So I think you see what you have. If it's an issue, then you pivot. You look at some of those older guys that are still out there on the market.
I agree. When you look at the market, you're either giving up age or you're like taking on someone who has some kind of injury history who may not even be ready for the beginning of the season. And Okorafor, like you mentioned, the age is a big part of this. He's not a finished product. Scott Peters, if he works out, if he, lives up to expectations, he could potentially get more out of Okorafor and actually elevate his game where, like you said, he's been a starter throughout his entire career. The only reason he was benched was because he got caught mouthing off about a guy who got fired 2 weeks later.
Yep.
So, is he opinionated? Sure. The Patriots know what they're getting themselves into. If he can actually ball out on the field, then this deal starts to look really good. And like you mentioned, maybe it's a long-term kind of relationship after he can maybe prove himself early on. So I think it's way too early to give up on Okorafor, especially considering he and City So, and obviously David Andrews, have been the only players who really haven't rotated with anybody. There hasn't been any change. The team feels comfortable with where they're at. And Calvin Anderson's a guy who, now that he's healthy, again, like you mentioned, absolutely insane situation. There's a video out there that talks about his cognitive ability and the way that he processes the game. He talks about going up against Von Miller when he was with the Broncos. And now he just sees the game a little bit faster, and they find really cool ways to quantify it. I'm not smart enough to break it down. Look for it if you can on YouTube. But just the intelligence makes him a really interesting kind of guy with someone like Scott Peters, who can maybe bring out his physical ability. Even Vidarian Lowe, if you look at his pressure numbers from the left side compared to the right, he's way better on the left. And you could see that on the tape. He was way more comfortable. So I would kind of throw him in as a dark horse, just as a backup, not as somebody compete for that top job. But, I think they have solid depth given what's actually out there. All right. As of today, if you had to give Eliot Wolf a letter grade for what he's done or hasn't done, what would it be and why? This is always a fun one.
I go with a B. I've been with a B on the offseason for a while now, the last several weeks. And I think, he has tried to bring in a wide receiver one. I know it has irritated people. He hasn't necessarily executed just yet, but he offered Calvin Ridley $40 million guaranteed. I was comfortable. I was okay with $40 million guaranteed. Thought that was more than fair. I would not have paid what Tennessee paid. I thought that was a dramatic overpay. So I didn't have an issue with him walking away. And then we find out from Mike Florio over the weekend that, they offered their number 34 pick in the draft in April for Ayuk, and they were willing to pay him $28 million per year. So the guys that have been available, they also had phone calls trying to, talk to Mike Evans before Mike Evans' wife shut that down and said, no, honey, you're staying in Tampa. I ain't moving. So, he's tried to go after a wide receiver one. And look, left tackle, Okorafor is what they went with. I don't know about you, Taylor. I don't think that Tyron Smith would have signed with the Patriots after what he said when he signed with the Jets. That was a heavy incentive deal. He said he wants to win. He's older. He's banged up. Really, the only beef you might have is Jonah Williams, maybe. Why didn't they go out and get that guy? But Okorafor, he could easily end up as good, if not better than Jonah Williams. It's not like Jonah's a rock star anymore. So, I mean, you look at the moves, it was a very difficult hand he was dealt with this offense. So many holes at premium positions, and you had the first-round pick that you were going to use on a quarterback at number 3, so you didn't really have much wiggle room there. I give him a solid pick.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head in terms of free agency, and then in terms of bringing people back. Like, we saw that they still have that line where, there's been some criticism about how many people they extended and re-signed, and now everybody wants a new deal. But like we talked about it with Devon Gottschalk, but then with Miles Bryant, Pharaoh Brown, Mac Wilson, guys who were role players and did have, a positive impact last season, clearly the Patriots weren't willing to give the money that they thought they were worth. But the people they did bring back, there's really not a lot of beef that you could come up with outside of maybe Hunter Henry and Kyle Duggar. You could argue maybe they were overpaid, but with all the money they have, I think it's okay if you play guys, especially Hunter Henry. He was going to be the top tight end on the market. I think you could say something similar about Kyle Duggar, depending on what the scheme fit would be. And then he also helped fill out the actual coaching staff, like Alex Van Pelt and everyone who came with him. They were talking to Nick Caley, but a young guy like Caley doesn't have a ton of connections. It's harder for somebody like him to bring a bunch of other, assistant coaches to become position coaches. Van Pelt already had a huge network, and you saw it with, Ben McAdoo, with different members like obviously Hughes was someone they already had a relationship with, but TC McCartney and all those guys. So on top of the free agency and everybody he brought into the organization, he stabilized the guys that were already contributing and then was actually able to give them a competitive coaching staff after last year's absolute disaster. I'll give him an A-. Just because, like you said, I think that he's made the efforts where he had to, and I don't really have any beef with the things that he's already done. I don't feel like he's overstretched or anything like that.
Yeah, until somebody gets traded until a wide receiver one is traded, I can't sit there and criticize him for not trading for a wide receiver one. If it's not there, it's not there. And the free agents at wide receiver, we talked about it. Michael Pittman stayed in Indy, Evans stayed in Tampa, Devontae Smith signed his deal with Philadelphia. A lot of those guys are just staying put. Jalen Waddle just got a deal in Miami. Wide receivers aren't as available as they might have been going back a few years ago, because that position is starting to really build momentum in the NFL as a premium position. And a lot of teams believe you need at least one guy, if not two. So given what he had to fill and the options that he had, I can't give him much lower than a B.
And then when it comes to the draft capital they could have next year, everybody wants the premier wide receiver, like we've already kind of touched on. If the Patriots are bad enough that they have a top 10 pick, you're almost guaranteed to get some kind of game-changing wide receiver, or they exceed expectations and are, maybe in the playoff hunt. And then it's, look, Eliot Wolf looks great because he just built a team that went from one of the worst in the league to one that was actually competitive pretty quickly. All right, last question from the mailbag. I would think Tyquan Thornton would be good with the new kickoff rules. What are your thoughts on why or why not, as well as why we have not seen, I'm guessing that says seen him in the role.
Well, Tyquan has to stay healthy. I am not one of those guys that will sit here and believe in Tyquan until he gives me reason to believe. The idea of Tyquan Thornton has always been more sexy than the actual reality of Tyquan Thornton. You can't make the club in the tub, as they say. And the dude has been hurt constantly. And unfortunately, that's unfortunate for him. But how can you ever think of him as a contributor to this team until he proves he can get through a camp without hurting himself? And so when you look at, do you really want to give him kickoff return duty or punt return duty? I don't want to put any more on his plate. I want to see if he can actually be a receiver in this league first. And if he proves that he could be a receiver in this league, then maybe you think about adding more to his responsibilities. And if you're going to look for a returner, I don't know about you, Taylor, but I mean, to me, Jalen Reagor, Marcus Jones, those guys are more than fine. I wouldn't put Pop back there because of his injury history and the concussions in his frame. And you could say the same thing about Marcus, but if Marcus isn't going to be a major contributor defensively, but I think they do have options other than Tyquan Thornton, where I would not be jumping at the chance to waste or spend a roster spot to say, oh, well, Thornton can return kicks. I think you could do a different job for him, which would be, I don't know, maybe practice squad, maybe figure it out. I'm not one of those guys. You can't bring me to believe in Tyquan Thornton. Just can't.
I agree. First of all, thank you so much, Choo Choo. Very nice of you. A lot of love for Nick in the chat. We love to see it. But no, especially, I'm sorry. Go on, buddy.
No, I was just gonna say thank you, Choo Choo, and thanks for the love that I'm getting, I guess.
Well deserved, brother. But no, I totally agree. And when you talk about the kick return role specifically, I think the reason the guys like Jalen Reagor and Marcus Jones are better fits is because of their contact balance. Now, they have given Tyquan Thornton, the screens and the end arounds and all of that, but we haven't really seen him consistently work through contact, stay on his feet. And the way it's set up, it's more like a run play than anything else. And I don't think that you really want Tyquan Thornton with a bunch of bodies around him. They've tried to use him in special teams. I think they kind of want to use his speed as maybe a gunner or something on the outside. And, I kind of understand that. Not quite as, I guess difficult to pick up as returning, where there's just so many things you have to judge. But yeah, I just don't think he really has the body type to thrive as a returner. And like you said, I'd rather just actually see him stay on the field first and foremost before you start giving him more things on his plate when, again, I just think there's better body types for that specific role. Nick, this has been a blast, brother. Thank you so much for joining me. Before I let you go, though, please let the people know where they can find you, what great stuff you got coming down the pipeline that we should be looking out for.
This flew by. This was the easiest 25 minutes that I've had talking Patriots in a long time. The Nick Cattle Show on YouTube, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 11 a.m. Patriots Now exclusive podcast that I'm doing. So that's happening 3 days a week. 98.5 The Sports Hub. I'll be on there tomorrow night. Alex Barth actually swinging by in studio for an hour with me from 8 to 9. So Tuesday and Friday night this week on 98.5. You can follow me on Twitter, all that good stuff. It's at Nick C Radio. Again, it's at Nick C Radio. And I appreciate the opportunity, man. I'm glad that we were able to finally catch up and talk some Patriots.
We got to do it again, brother. Thank you so much again for coming on. And thank you all, as always, for watching. Now, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We will see you next time. Peace, y'all.